So welcome back, everybody. Uh, we've got more really exciting interview to come. Penny Hawkins is going to be talking with May Pettigrew. Penny is the principal consultant at Creative Evaluation Limited, which provides independent measurement and evaluation advisory services to regional and global organizations. And she tells me that she's been doing evaluation for 35 years. So that's an amazing experience. So I'm going to hand over now over to Penny, who will in turn introduce May. Penny, it's all yours.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here today. I'm in the UK, but I normally live in New Zealand, so the time difference is a lot kinder today. I'm delighted to be doing this with May and for CECAN. May is a past president of the European Evaluation Society, and I know she's also had a long career in evaluation. May, you may want to say a few words about yourself.
Oh, thanks, Penny. And I'm delighted to be here today with you all. In terms of, yes, myself and my background, yeah, I'm long in the tooth. I'm as long in the tooth as you are, Penny, I can assure you. In fact, my passion for evaluation goes back to the 1980s. And I first got involved in evaluation when I went to do a master's in social research methodology at the University of East Anglia. And there I was based in the Centre for Applied Research and Education, which was a pioneering institution in the development of evaluation in the UK. It was also a pioneering institution in the development of action research in the UK, although Elliot Stern and I have had a few difficulties in coming to a common agreement about this, since, of course, the Tavistock has its traditions in action research. But anyway, what was really exciting about that was that having done my master's, got really interested in evaluation. I went back, I was employed. My first job in evaluation was as a research associate at the University of East Anglia in that centre, where I was under the mentorship and subsequently supervision of Barry MacDonald, who has been the most profound influence on my evaluation thinking and practice. And of course, Barry was the architect of democratic evaluation, which I feel is even more important and valuable at these times of democratic backsliding. And I put in a plug for the EES conference, which is upcoming in Lille in October, the end of October, which is Peter. You've just heard Peter. Peter is president. It's his conference, and the focus is on evaluation for vibrant democracy. So do come. But anyway, to rush on a bit, I think what's interesting too about the evaluation work I did was I'm very grateful to see that it ties in with some aspects of important historical developments in evaluation. And I think some of that might be interesting for the audience here, participants, to know a little bit about, because I don't think people realize that evaluation actually developed originally in the US, and it developed under the Title I reforms of education, major post-war reforms of education in the US. And the traditional approach to evaluation was very much about student assessment. Did the pupils perform better in their tests as a result of these educational reforms? But these reforms were massive. They were structural, they were organizational, they were profoundly effective in affecting of the basic conditions of education, pedagogies, and the whole works. And so that led to a concern about how do you deal with complexity. So it's interesting that the whole notion of complexity was central to the development of evaluation in the beginning 50 years ago. And the greats of evaluation, Scriven, Cronbach, House, Bob Stake, Carol Weiss, Campbell and Stanley. These people all looked at the problems of the Title I reforms and realised that the old tick box and classical student assessment wouldn't cut the mustard. And that's where they developed programme evaluation that was looking at the complex components and the actual experiences of programmes and those conditions, cultures, pedagogies, the interacting effects, the feedbacks, the components of a reform system. And that led, of course, to some of the most seminal works in evaluation that we have. My institution in the University of East Anglia was probably the first to develop a strong relationship with those evaluation leaders in the US. And so my upbringing, if you like, in evaluation was an exchange often with people like Bob Stake and Ernie House, who've both been important mentors to me. And also we had strong links with the general kind of seminal leaders of the field, and they would come and we'd have seminars and things and care. So that informed, of course, my evaluation, but also being strongly linked to the democratic tradition. My values have always been strongly about evaluation as supporting the public good, and its values are about advancing the information needs of an informed citizenry. It's got a really important democratic component, which I think is, again, all the more needed in these days. And that also evaluation needs to be accessible, and it needs to be able to work in ways that are ethically valuable, that reflect the respect for persons of an evaluation constituency, the evaluands. And that respect for person was a very important aspect of Barry's work, which is not always recognised, but also it's a political activity, and it's always been central to the way I think about and act in evaluation, that it's about brokering information across hierarchies of power, and that dealing with those hierarchies of power and making sure that the voices of the marginalised get represented in an evaluation has an important aspect of equality, equity provision, as well as the democratic accountability part. So
Yeah, so thanks. So
yeah,
May, so I think that was, I also think history and knowing where the field has come from and where it is now is really important. And it sounds like you brought forward a number of things that you've learned along that long period of working in evaluation and the global perspective. If we bring the focus into Europe, where I know you've been working in recent years, what's the particular history of policy evaluation in Europe? If you could just kind of summarize that.
yeah. Well, it's interesting too because my period in the UK as an evaluator was basically the 90s, and my period in the European scene started in early 2000s, 2001 actually. And I think, and you might want to comment on this, so much of what emerged in terms of policy evaluation practices and the structures within Europe from the early 2000s on, I think resonate with the shifts in evaluation over the 90s, which certainly in the UK were strongly under the kind of post-Thatcher demand for performativity, and the growth of the public management and subsequently RBM. I'd be interested actually to know your take on that, because I think those historical developments have been really important in shaping how evaluation and particularly policy evaluation is construed these days. And particularly, I think, from the New Zealand perspective, where you had a very strong public management ethos going for a long time, didn't you?
Indeed, we can take some responsibility for that in New Zealand, I think, along with the faults that it had. I think yes, the RBM. I think, and I don't think we're past that phase yet in terms of the way we look at things. I think what that brought was, of course, a very linear way of thinking, very deterministic. So A leads to B leads to C. And thankfully, we've realized that the world's much more complex and we need to find different ways of looking at policy interventions and how they work in a complex situation and a rapidly changing situation where there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. So I think I'm kind of quite pleased that we've realized what the limitations of those sorts of approaches, the linear approaches, but also the deficit-based way of thinking about things. And I think Peter touched on this when he likened evaluation with or contrasted it with audit. And I think I've learned a lot through working in New Zealand and other places to look at other types of knowledge, and particularly in New Zealand, Indigenous Māori knowledge, which is hugely helpful at the time that we find ourselves now, because it is a holistic way of looking at the world and our place as people in it. And it acknowledges complexity and gives us a different set of lenses to look through for evaluation as well. So I think being open, rather than adopting a sort of RBM linear deterministic kind of approach, I think now the challenge is for us to be much more open-minded and take a much broader lens to look across how can we do this now? How can we respond to the challenge of the time? And what are the implications there for how we do evaluation, what kinds of methodologies, etc. So I think, there are some, as with everything, there were some benefits to new public management and an RBM type approach, but I think increasingly it's becoming less useful. So we need to be mindful of that and to be a little more sophisticated in how we look at things, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. But also, I think it would be really good for us to pick up on the issues around the impact and the importance and the influence of issues around evaluation, issues around indigeneity, decolonisation, the whole Made in Africa movement, which I think was a pioneering influence on localising and respecting local knowledge and valorizing that in evaluation, and what kind of influence that has, because I think that's really important in thinking about systems approaches and complexity. And let's do return to that. But as they say in French, retournons aux nos moutons. Let's go back to the European scene. I think you're right. I think that the whole public management had focused us on performativity. Let's make sure that the stuff is working, it's efficient, it's effective. The initial policy evaluation movement, I think the European Commission was actually quite a spearhead organization in this. I actually went there in 2001, just prior to the the publication of the major European Commission proposals on better regulation. And these have become landmark in terms of European Commission policy and practice in terms of policy formulation and its evaluation. So the Barroso Commission set up the better regulation, which was designed to streamline policy, make it more effective, make it more consultative based. So it set up a whole raft of requirements for public consultation around new proposals. And central to it was the institution of impact assessment for all new policy proposals. And these became mandatory. And impact assessments were designed to look at, they had a kind of requirements in terms of the formula, which still maintains really today. What's the problem? Identify it. What are the objectives to be pursued in the policy? What are the policy options? You should have a number of policy options. And what are the impacts that can be evidentially derived from each of these policy options? What are the advantages, disadvantages, trade-offs? What are the costs? What are the administrative benefits? What are the impacts on European citizens? And looking across the social, economic, and environmental impacts of those policies. And interestingly, right at the beginning, the IA had to arrangements arrangements for monitoring and evaluation. Now, I was actually in DG Connect at the time, and part of the evaluation network in the Commission, which was under DG Budget. And SecGen were the spearheads for the impact assessment and better regulation agenda. And I think that, looking again at the history, I think that these are actually quite important issues because DG budget, although it sounds kind of terribly financial, and of course linking evaluation to budgets, you would think made it very, very, like you say, sort of linear and narrow. But in fact, it was a really strong professional group, and we created guidelines which were quite expansive and supported learning and reflection and so forth, and methodologically plural. But the SecGen developed impact assessment. I was involved in some of the initial working groups on impact assessment, and it was already, let's be frank, dirigiste. The SecGen comes from, in effect, the Cabinet Office of the Commissioner. And so its orientations towards policy, strategy, it's actually positioned not at the level of nuance and understanding the complexities of particular issues. It's bent on getting this out, getting it done, and in effect, too, covering our backs within the European scene and the public discourses. And of course, the focus is very much on furthering the European internal market, improving competitiveness, and competitiveness has become an increasingly important strand. Funnily enough, you'd think that with the poly crisis, with huge kind of dangers to European integration, to democracy and so forth, trade issues, loss of confidence in allies such as the US and so forth, that would shift the European policy domain to being much more looking at adaptive responses about building in flexibility, basically taking a systems approach because of the unpredictabilities and turbulence that represent the kind of loss of the old world order. But in fact, what I see is a strengthening of the institutional continuity, and in particular, and actually, it's not a hugely negative judgment. I'm just making the point. An increasing focus on competitiveness. Let's strengthen European economy in the face of these global challenges. And there's been a recent communication from the Commission just in April that is on further simplification. So looking to simplify administrative burdens and simplify policy process.
So how do you think these developments have affected the use of evidence that's produced by evaluation? Has it resulted in evaluation being taken more seriously, or maybe less so? How's it affected use of evaluation?
I'd say it's a huge impact. The initial drive was for impact assessments of all new policy proposals. So those started in 2003. Fairly shortly, a scrutiny organisation was set up, initially called the Impact Assessment Board, which scrutinised in selected impact assessments to scrutinise for their quality.
Just to clarify, by impact, so you're talking about ex ante impact assessment.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Impact assessment, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the evidence base to support the formulation of the new policy or the amended policy. And like I say, it's based on that rubric that I suggested.
So that makes use of previous evaluations as well as other types of
Now
analysis.
that came later.
Okay.
Evaluation was a bit of a lost soul in the beginning. There were many evaluations. I mean, I was involved hugely in evaluations in my DG. That was my role. In particular, things like the Horizon program, for example, which was then the framework program, and various evaluations of different programs and projects. But it was scattered ad hoc, and there was no linking of evaluation into the policy cycle. The whole better regulation mechanism has actually moved to bridge those links so that you have a policy is designed, it's evidence-based through an impact assessment. That impact assessment includes measures for monitoring and evaluation. The relatively recent rules say that you must evaluate first before you engage in a policy debate for a new policy, an impact assessment process, so that you have evaluation feeding into the next policy. And so it is now linked. And for that reason too, from about 2015, when we had the strengthened scrutiny activity, the quality of impact assessments and evaluations being assessed by a board, the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, evaluations came to the fore as being much, much more in there as an object of quality control and scrutiny.
Okay.
Actually, I do find the work of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board actually very commendable, and it does have a huge impact on the process. They produce an annual report every year where they've scrutinised can be 50 different reports. And these are a mixture of evaluations and impact assessments, and they give an opinion which is either negative, positive, or positive with recommendations for improvement.
Okay, that's interesting.
And
So thinking about all of that and where it might be now, how would you see things rolling out in the future? What do you think the future of evaluation is in Europe? And if you could say something about the extent to which systems thinking and complexity features in that.
yeah, well, I was very privileged to be invited to give an input at last year's Regulatory Scrutiny Board annual conference. They produced this report on their work over the previous year, and they hold a conference and they have a number of different inputs. And so I had a really good look at the work of the board and those evaluations and impact assessments that they've scrutinised. And what strikes me is that there remains a tendency to see evaluation as an overhead. It's a necessary exercise to be conducted because it's part of the whole regulatory framework. It can often be conducted by the most able and committed professionals. I really, really do value the work of European Commission officials. They're so bright and they're tireless, but they are not in the main evaluators. What happens is that evaluations are commissioned normally through a framework contracting process. This is a bit technical, but I think it's quite important for people to understand that under the financial regulation, which governs procurement, an open call is a huge endeavour with huge timing for consultation, for responses and so forth, and a major effort to put together an agreed, an accepted contract. So the Commission, and I was there when this sort of started up, starts using framework contracts, which are contracts that are awarded for a basket of institutions who have then the ability to respond to mini calls that are short in duration within the Commission. So the Commission departments have their cluster of providers, mainly the big consultancy firms in evaluation, and they bid internally to get these evaluation assignments. So there's good expertise coming into the impact assessments that are done, to the evaluations that are done. But the Commission is still responsible for those, and any findings are put into a Commission communication that's authored by the Commission itself. And the problems, I think, arise in that the focus is not sufficiently on learning. It's still on accountability. Let's watch our backs here. I don't think that the senior management in the Commission DGs take sufficient involvement in the evaluations that are being conducted within their DGs. So they tend not to have the kind of high positioning that they would need to have to make sure that they are really engaged properly.
Okay.
I
I
think
think Paul's just appeared. That's the cue for the
no,
Q&A.
we've got so much to talk about.
Well, there is
Complexity.
and if nobody else wants to ask you anything, Mary, then we'll jump back in there. But as we did in the first session, let's pause at that point. I've got about 10 questions from what you just said, but I'm going to save all mine. One or two questions will come in, I'm sure, from the group if we give them a moment to have a think about it. And we've got people joining the session as well. That lit all sorts of fires going for me from working with evaluation in the UK and the better regulation unit and stuff. So fascinating to understand better some of the history of where some of that came from. We have a question, an opening question from Emma. Emma, why don't you jump on and pose that one? Others on the line, do pop your questions into the Q&A and we'll handle them as they come in.
Hi, wasn't expecting to jump in, but I was just really what you were saying there about commissioning framework contracts and the open call, and whether you could expand a little bit on maybe what definitely doesn't work about that and could work better.
Well, I think it's simply constraining the market to a number of so-called tried and tested providers who form a kind of set of continuously producing agents for commission evaluations. It's an understandable response to a constraint, but it I think essentially limits the ability to bring in creative imagination and evaluation, to bring in innovation. And the whole system within the European Commission is really very much around a kind of still quite linear, actually still quite modernist notion of planned change that is predictable and can be defined and evaluated as such.
Thank you.
Waiting to see if others want to bring questions in. Can I extend that one briefly, Perry? Do you think there's a better way of contracting evaluation rapidly, so in time, so there's not the time delay for the policy cycle? Do you have an antidote to what you've just said, if you like?
Well, under better regulation, I think the financial regulation needs to be deregulated a bit. There's a really important, it's this trade-off all the time between, proper procedure that is fair and just and equitable, and the huge bureaucratic complexity and difficulty and obstacles that poses. There are actually ways within the financial regulation to commission evaluations more quickly, which few, I think, really understand. I was also on the Public Procurement Committee when I was in the Commission for my DG, and so I worked within the regulations. So it's difficult, it is possible, but I do think this is an area that needs to be examined and some changes brought in, because I think it is quite limiting.
We may come back to contracting and how that affects the whole thing a bit later on. Anna Manzano, would you like to unmute and pop your video on and bring your question for Mary and or Penny?
Hello, thank you so much, May and Penny, for a fascinating conversation. Just wanted to pick up on the last sentence before we started the Q&A about, from learning from evaluation and just doing accountability. I supported the Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland last year to do the first monitoring and evaluation strategy. And in that process, I had many conversations for the people that are doing policy and evaluation on a daily basis, basically the civil servants that have to run the department many times, and especially in Northern Ireland, sometimes without, for a while, they didn't have a minister, etc. So I was quite surprised by kind of the sociologists will call the materialities about not being able to find where the evaluation reports are from the past anymore. People will say things, because some of these things are confidential, so they're not in the public space, or it's difficult to find it. In the past, they would have been in drawers, and now they are some kind of drive somewhere in someone's computer that no one can get hold of. From things like civil servants will move on quite fast because of their own promotion. So how does the evaluation knowledge travels within the institution? So I was just interested whether you could reflect a bit more from your experience, not just in the European Commission about this.
How do evaluations influence within the institution, or how well are they disseminated, or
the barriers to actually learn from one evaluation to the other, or from people that knows about evaluation be consulted. People will say from working from home nowadays, even they don't even know who knows about evaluation anymore, while in the past you used to knock at the door. So that kind of more from the microphone for how promotion works.
They do, and I think it relates also to my conception of say, the European Commission. I think it's really interesting to look at organisations, if you like, from an anthropological perspective. And I see the European Commission as something of a tribal organisation, where the really important decisions get done through a smoke your pipe talking procedure across the great elders. But for the rest, everything is done by a written procedure. So the text, and it also relates to the number of languages and the precision that's required, the text becomes the key instrument within that anthropological kind of framework, if you like. So when you have something in a text, especially if it's gone through like a kind of communication or something, it becomes something that has to be paid attention to. So actually, evaluations do inform changes in a program and indeed in a policy. A good example here is two recent ones, very important policies in Europe: REACH, which is the chemicals regulation, and the European Competitiveness Fund, which is a major multi-financial annual, kind of competitiveness support for Europe. Their impact assessments were rejected by the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, who set out a whole load of concerns about what was not being properly addressed in those impact assessments, that needed clarification, that needed substantiation, that needed evidence. And REACH is still not actually through in terms of being a proposal, because it has to address those issues from the findings of the kind of quality control over it, and similarly with the competitiveness. So there are important things go on, and I do see that, like Peter was saying, the cohesion policy has been so informed and evolved as a result of all the evaluations that have been done. So yes, and I think that I can say more if you want, but I think that's probably enough for now.
Thank you.
I can just comment quickly on
Penny.
reports issue. So I worked for some years in the UK government. I was head of evaluation for a government department, and although the department did have a publication policy that all evaluations would be published on a publicly accessible website, it didn't get past the political side of things, and as all evaluations would go to a minister, and the suppression of potentially controversial information. So by that I mean, it'd send up a completed evaluation report pre-publication, and it would come back with some of the text redacted. Because the fear was that the media would get hold of it and etc. So I think the other side of that is that I think a lot of information. I did some research years and years ago about how people get their information. Of course, everything's changed now, but the power of people-to-people sharing of information. So bringing in the expert who's been looking at this issue for years and years and years and kind of has a long-term memory. It's not quite the same as the written word, but nevertheless it can be really useful. So there's these challenges. Even if you have a good policy in place, it's still difficult to actually get full information out there in the public sector.
And of course, Penny, this raises the issue about independence of evaluation.
It does.
How and where evaluation units are located and how they influence the broader policy scene.
We shouldn't underestimate the power dynamics and all of that, I would say.
Yeah.
Can we go with that for a moment, that idea?
Yeah.
Because what's interesting me in the session we've had here is we've introduced not just a complexity of the system that is being evaluated, but a complexity of the system in which the evaluation then lives. That you said, Mary, evaluation is inherently a political activity.
Yeah.
And the idea of how you can be an ethical and independent evaluator, and yet understand that there are political complexities around what you've written, how it is received, how it's communicated. Do you have thoughts on that? I mean, I've experienced this, certainly in evaluations. Where does this go in our domain? How do we cope with that?
Well, can I come in on that? Because what we haven't managed to get to yet is what's the future of evaluation, and where do systems approaches come in? How can we evaluate complex initiatives when we're straitjacketed by traditions of bureaucratic process, which are still rooted in a linear framework, ex post and prescriptive and preordinate and so forth. And I think that's about thinking through the position of evaluation, where it's located in organizations, and also the role of evaluators. I've been so committed to independence in evaluation. It's part of my kind of genes, really, as an evaluator in the democratic tradition. But actually, I'm seeing that in the face of polycrisis, in a time of such uncertainty, a turbulence, breakdown of systems and democratic erosions and so forth, where we have so much unpredictability, we need initiatives to be systems orientated. We need systems to be agile, adaptive, incorporating foresight, being able to be flexible in the face of uncertainties and change. We need evaluation, therefore, to transform, in my view, as well. And we need evaluators to transform from the stand back, particularly sort of ex post, on programs that may not have huge relevance in the future because of these uncertainties, to strategic partners in the whole policy program cycle. What we do really well, we have the most amazing developments in methodology. We have a huge attenuation to evidence and to providing evidence. If we can work our evidence within a wider scene of program and policy development and locate ourselves at points where we can try and have more influence on the centers of power, rather than standing outside in an evaluation unit which, while it's independent, actually fails to have any real impact on where the power rests and where the policies and programs emerge.
That sounds like a call for a role in evaluation that will require a considerable increase in political and organizational maturity, if you like. So making it less mechanistic and more of a partnership has implications for the skill and the understanding people doing it have to hold. Is that right?
Yeah. And, you know, you've got, you might want to come in there, Penny, because your involvement
I'd sum it,
is central.
I'd sum it up by saying less technocratic and more relational.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that will then butt up against your contracting problem, because the contracting processes feed the idea that, well, if we need to standardize and have it fit into a box in some way, makes it difficult. We are getting towards lunchtime, and I have no more questions on the box, but there's a couple of minutes left if anybody wants to pop one in. If not, Penny, if you have another question for Mary, or Mary, if you have a question for the crowd, that would be most welcome in our last couple of minutes.
No, but I'd be really interested in another question from the participants, because it's so difficult when you know you're talking to a black box.
Yeah.
Oh, you
Manila, come back on video and expand on the point you've just dropped in the questions. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see me? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
you're on. You're on.
Yeah.
We'll spotlight you as well.
Loud and clear.
Good. I was just thinking about how words are important and how they make the difference. For example, we use always stakeholder. Stakeholders, those people who have stakes on something, but there are relation holders. So I want to go back to what Penny said, more relation and less technocracy. So to focus more on how people are related, on how people get in touch to each other, combine to each other, influence each other every day. That's something important. And yeah, unfortunately, technocracy, technicity, and everything that is related to evaluation processes can suffocate this, because we focus too much on methodologies and less to people. And I want to use a statement that I always say: everything starts with people. If not about people, we are not here to evaluate anything. So that's a starting point. If we are here to evaluate what anthropocentric era actions people have done, communities and people and countries have done in terms of human action, it means that people come first in every sense. So we have to start from there. I think we should do a step back and start from ourselves as part of a community, and then everything will come as a consequence. And so when we when we speak about how to say generalization or standardization, I don't believe in that, because every context is different. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry.
I think to pause there, Manila, with the focus back on the people involvement, and that links back to something Peter said in the first session, wasn't it? You know,
exactly.
That there are humans at the end of all these technocratic processes and evaluations. There are people who are finally affected by it, by the evaluations. We are being very, very strict and keeping to time today. Let me thank May and Penny for launching us into an interesting discussion there. And to tell you what's going to happen over the next couple of hours.